to the First World War. And sadly, many of those men did not come home again. I know some of you are very young, but others of you are older and you'll know a bit about this. You know what happens in war? People kill each other, and in that particular war was truly dreadful because something in the region of 10 million people were killed. And nearly 1 million of them came from this country. And some of those came from this village. But 2 or 3 who had survived the war and came home lived in the village when I moved here. And I went into that pub one day and I sat down with half a pint of beer in my hand, and sitting opposite me was a man called Wilf Ellis. Wilf Ellis lived just opposite the pub. And I knew he was one of the 3 old men who had been alive at the time of the First World War, and indeed he was one of the ones who had been there as a soldier. And we started talking. And he talked and talked and talked about how it was to be 17 years old and go off to that war and the terrible things that he'd seen and that had happened to him and to his pals. I was very touched by that, very upset by that, because although I'd read lots of books about the First World War, lots of poems, here I was sitting across the fireplace from a man who had actually been there. So I listened very hard. And I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller. So I'm interested in just about everything. I'm interested in you lot. That's amazing, isn't it? But this man really interested me because of his life. I knew also that there was another man who had been to the First World War, who lived down my lane just on the edge of Iddesleigh, a man called Captain Budget. And I went to see him. And I said, were you in the First World War? And he said, yes, I was there with horses. And he then told me about how close a friend his horse was to him when he went to that war. And then I also talked to another man who lived here called Albert Weeks. All these men by now, of course, have died because they became very, very old, and as happens when you get old, you die, and they're now gone. So here's what the thing was. I was really lucky, because what happened was these old people were telling me their story of this dreadful war, probably for the last time, and so I thought, you've got to try and tell their story. How do you want to tell a story about the First World War? I didn't want to tell a story that was about winning it or losing it, because I'm very firmly of the belief that no one wins a war. It seems to go on to the next war and the next war and the next war. So I thought, write about what really counts in a war, and what really counts is that people suffer. So I thought, write a story which is about the suffering on all sides. That's the British side, the German side, the French side, the Belgian side, the Canadian side, the American side, all the people who were in that war and who died in their millions. Tell their story. How could you do that? Well, actually, through the horse. If the horse, Joey, who you've seen now, was born on a farm around here, which he was, and there's a museum now, just down that valley, a war horse museum, which you can visit if you like someday. And he was born in my head, in that valley. And he grew up there with this young man, Albert. And Albert and he got on really, really well. Here's the problem, and you heard it at the beginning of the book. Albert had a father who used to get drunk from time to time, and who didn't have much money, and in the end what he does, the father, listen now, because it happened outside here. In 1914, we're talking almost exactly 100 years ago, at the beginning of the war, there was a sale just outside the pub of horses. They needed horses in the army in those days, because you needed something to ride on, the cavalry. There were no tanks at the beginning of the war. You needed something for the cavalry. You needed horses to pull your guns, to pull your ammunition, to pull your ambulances. They needed horses, and there weren't enough horses in the army. So they came to villages all over England and to Iddesleigh, paid good money for the best horses they could find. And Albert's father sold Joey without telling Albert. Albert was really upset, so what Albert decides to do is himself to join the army and go looking over in France where this war was. And the whole story is about Albert's search really for Joey and Joey's journey through that war. And what happens to Joey is that he's trained to be a British cavalry horse, goes across to France on a ship, charges in the cavalry in the first cavalry charge of the war, and he's captured by the Germans. So then he's used by the Germans for pulling ambulances and for pulling guns. And then he lives on a French farm so he gets to know, if you like, French people. So it's, if you like, a horse's eye view of the whole of the First World War. The book came out, and no one paid any attention to it at all. That's the sad thing. And then the National Theatre, for whom this young man works because he's an actor, isn't he? They, wonderfully, a man called Tom Morris, who was a director, read the book, and he read it because he wanted to make a play with some wonderful puppeteering people called handspring puppets, who make puppets, not just little twiddly things you can put on your hand, but great big life-size puppets. And Tom wanted to work with them, and he was looking for a project, and he picked Warhorse. So the phone rang one day and they said, Michael, this is National Theatre here, Tom Morris, we want to make a play of Warhorse. I thought, wow. And then he said, with puppets. And I thought, puppets? You can't have a play about the First World War with a bunch of puppets. It's ridiculous. The only puppets I'd seen like a horse on the stage were pantomime horses. You laugh at them. But he said, no, come and look, come and look. And I went to see what these people could do. And anyway, that was 7 years ago. Since then, this play has been seen by nearly 4 million people all over the world. I've been to Australia to see it, and I've been to America to see it. As we're sitting here now, it's going around America, and it's going to start. And here's the lovely thing, listen to this. In October, the play is going to Germany, Berlin. Now, as you know, Germany was our enemy at that time, and was 20 years later as well in the Second World War. But what's wonderful about this is this play is really about peace, and it's about reconciliation and people making friends after wars are over. So it's going to be in Berlin, trotting around England at the same time. You are staying, aren't you, in this country? Good, it's question time. Here's the thing, have you got anything you want to ask besides please will you go away? You wouldn't like to see Joe again, would you? No, they don't want to. They're not remotely interested. I think he's coming out again. He's had a drink. Go and get him, will you? Any questions?